Hello, we are People in Action. We know housing is a big issue affecting our communities. Today, we have invited Sophie, who works at Shelter, a housing charity, and will get information on how they can help people. Welcome, Sophie, and thank you for attending this interview. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Pedro. Hi, thanks for having me. So my name's Sophie, as you said. I work in Shelter in their campaigns team, and I'm the activism officer. So that means I think about how people can get more involved in our campaigns and how we can work with different organisations to support different communities to kind of campaign on their own housing issues, in addition to supporting our national campaigns.
Thank you. My question for you is, what is Shelter? What is the meaning of Shelter? And how many people work there?
So Shelter is a national charity, and we help people who are struggling with bowed housing and homelessness issues. I think at the end of 2020, we had about 1,400 employees and working across the country. That might not be the same today, but that was the sort of last count. So in terms of what shelter means, because the word shelter in the dictionary means to provide a place of temporary accommodation or shelter from bad weather, I think that means lots of people think we offer accommodation, but actually that's not what we do. So what we do is help millions of people every year through providing housing advice. So we have a website where there's loads and loads of information about what to do in different housing situations. So if you've been served an eviction notice, or if you're renting for the first time, or if you're trying to get your deposit back, there's a whole wealth of information on our website, which is freely available to anyone. The other thing that we do is we support individuals or families with particular issues. So it means that we have like a helpline that you can call, and we have services based in different parts of the country where you can work with a housing advisor, and they'll take you and support you with a particular issue. We call that casework. And then the third thing that we do is we provide legal services. So that means that we help people take cases to court. And for a recent example, in July last year, we took forward a case where it was ruled for the first time ever that refusing to rent to people because they are on housing benefit is discrimination and it's illegal. So those are some of the things we do, but most importantly, we campaign for long-term changes to tackle some of the root causes that kind of cause some of the problems that we see up and down the country today.
Thank you for your answer, Sophie. Now I give way to my partner, Yusuf, to continue with this interview. Thank you.
Hello, Sophie. My name is Yusuf. I have some questions for you. My first one would be, what do you do in Shelter?
So I kind of like briefly mentioned before that I'm in the campaigns team and I am the activism officer, but I can give a bit more information about what that means if that's useful, because the word activism can mean lots of different things to different people. But the way that we kind of define activism, Shelter, and what I do is, like I said, I'm thinking about interesting and creative ways for people to sort of take action and get involved in our big priority campaigns. So, you know, whereas you could do things like signing a petition, I'm trying to think about ways in which we could, for example, run a training on how to campaign in the streets, so that if we do some street campaigning, people can get involved with us. Or I'm thinking about certain things that we can do that are more creative. So there's something that's similar to activism, but we call it craftivism, and it's when you use sort of arts and crafts to do more sort of creative actions. So you might do a beautifully handmade card that you send to someone because you want them to change something for the better. So I know that there was a really great example of something like that the grassroots campaign group called Hassle did very recently, and I think English for Action were also involved, where you got children to draw pictures to send to the housing minister. That's a great example of craftivism. So I think about activities like that people can do. But the other thing that I do is think about how to build relationships with different community groups so that we can explore how we might work together in some ways. And that might be through doing joint campaign actions, or it might be through sort of building relationships so that we can find out what different community groups need and if there's anything that we can do to support them through training or giving advice.
Okay, thank you. My second question will be, when was Shelter created and why, and who is the founder?
Shelter was actually formed back in the 60s, in 1966 in December, and it was the vision of a man called Reverend Bruce Kendrick and someone called Des Wilson, who was a political activist. So when we first started, we were called the National Campaign for Homeless People, and we launched in a church, in a crypt, but let's just think of it as a church, in London, in a place called St Martin's-on-the-Field. At that time in the 60s, there was a kind of spike in interest around poverty and housing and homelessness issues. And that was partly because there was a BBC drama on called Kathy Come Home, and it followed a family who were evicted from their home. And from there, the public became really interested in the issue of homelessness, and it really raised the profile of what people were experiencing. So from that, Des Wilson and Bruce Kendrick chose to launch the charity in December, and the public were really behind it. So back in by 1970, there were around 500 local groups all across the country working at a community level to support people and people that were homeless. So it was a really interesting start, and yeah, I think we're trying to get kind of back towards that and how we can reach out and work more with communities.
Thank you. And my last one will be, what is the objective of Shelter?
So I mentioned earlier that we provide lots of advice, but what we also do, as I touched on briefly, is that we run big campaigns. So we call on the government and others to tackle some of the root causes and the consequences of the housing problems that we see all over the country. So our main aims at the minute are sort of renters' rights and putting an end to discrimination. So like what I talked about before, when some people are turned away from renting properties because they are on housing benefit or universal credit, there are lots of agencies and landlords that put out a ban called a sort of a no DSS ban, which is an outdated term, but it basically means that if you are on housing benefit, you're locked out from renting quite a lot of properties. So renters' rights generally and sort of putting an end to discrimination is one area that we work on, one of our objectives. So another one is we want to get more social housing built. I know there are lots of other groups that are campaigning on that as well. And the third thing is supporting people who are struggling, so through providing our housing advice. So those are three broad objectives that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I will ask my colleague Antonio to continue with you. Thank you.
Hello, Sofia. My name is Antonio. And my first question is, do you have any examples of successful campaigns that you have run?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, we do. Over the years, we've campaigned often alongside other organisations and groups to win a number of changes over the years. So I can give you a few. So we campaigned successfully to ban unfair letting agent fees in November 2016, so a few years ago now. Renters were sort of being ripped off by being charged unreasonable fees for things like reference checks, credit checks. There was even a case of someone being charged £500 for those checks, but there were also fees of £200 for removing saucepans from a property, for ironing curtains, all kinds of ridiculous examples. So thanks to our campaigning, those letting agent fees are now banned, which is great. It saves people a lot of money. Another thing that we campaigned on was for the passage of a piece of legislation called the Fitness for Human Habitation Bill. And that came into effect in 2019. So it means that it makes it law that homes that are rented in England must be safe, and it gives tenants the right to take legal action against their landlord if they fail to maintain their duties. Another thing that we did quite recently, and I touched on this a couple of times around when I talked about discrimination, we had a campaign called No DSS Discrimination Campaign. And last year, we had 2 historic rulings in court. So we supported people to take their landlord or agency to court for applying that blanket ban. So for preventing people from renting a property even though that they could afford it, and that was on the basis of them being in receipt of housing benefit. So those hearings are the first time ever that's been an issue has been taken to court, and there's been a ruling that the discrimination was unlawful. That's never happened before. So that's amazing, and we're working now to make sure that everyone knows that it's unlawful to apply blanket bans to people on housing benefit. And very, very recently, given the pandemic, we successfully campaigned for an eviction ban. So evictions during the COVID pandemic, we pushed the government to ensure that no one was going to be evicted during the pandemic, and for the ban to be extended as the sort of restrictions on movement were extended through the year. So those are 4 quite chunky campaigns that we've won, often alongside like working with other organisations and charities. So yeah, that's quite a few examples there.
My second question is, how long does it take you to resolve a problem?
Yeah, another great question. So it can often take like years to get change. That's one of the things about campaigning. Many of the campaigns and the wins that I just described have come about because loads of different groups and organisations have been campaigning for years to get that change. So it's often the case that your wins a change in one area on one particular thing. So I mentioned sort of evictions, but often that then means that you uncover something else. So like a really good example of that is revenge evictions. So a revenge eviction is when a landlord tries to evict a tenant because they've asked for repairs or they've complained about bad conditions. So landlords can give you something called a Section 21 notice, which is it's basically a way that they can evict you without having to provide a reason for evicting you. So whilst we got the law changed on revenge evictions a few years ago, Section 21s are still a huge problem, and people are still being evicted using Section 21s. It's so much of a problem that even the government recognises that and knows that, and made a promise to end the use of Section 21s. And this year we are we're currently campaigning to make the government keep that promise, and we're doing that campaigning with at least 20 other organisations in a campaign called the Renters Reform Bill campaign. So it's a campaign all about reforming the private rented system and getting rid of Section 21s as a way to evict people. So it can take a long time, basically.
My last question is it possible to be part of your work?
Yes, definitely. There are lots of different ways to get involved with Shelter. Some of those examples, if I focus mainly on our sort of campaigning, the best way to get involved with our national campaigns and to find out about those is to join our campaigns mailing list, which you can do on the website. That's the best way to find out what we're doing, what we're campaigning on, what actions we're asking people to take, which could be signing a petition, it could be signing a card to an MP or another campaign target. It could be sharing a story. So that's the best place to sort of sign up and hear about our work. It's also somewhere that you can find out about new things that we're doing. So we are working on a training program at the moment to support people to campaign. It's in progress and it will be coming out hopefully later this year, but it's something that you could find out about by joining our campaigns mailing list. And then we also have other ways for you to get involved. So we have something called our Heroes Network, and that stands for Housing Emergency Response Operation. And that's where you sign up and you give your phone number, and we send out alerts and actions and news and opportunities via text. So we often use that, and we have quite a wide network where we send messages to people, and sometimes those people then speak out in the media, or sometimes they share a story, or sometimes they attend events. It's just another way of getting involved. And then there are more ways to get involved. So in terms of like on a local level, something that we've started doing over the past 2 years is community organising. And I know that you guys in English for Action know a lot about community organising. So we have 7 community organisers working in different cities in the UK. I'm going to name them. So that's London, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Plymouth, Newcastle and Norwich. And those organisers are sort of building local campaigns. So the best way to find out about those is probably again to go onto our website to find out sort of what's going on and how to sort of reach out and be part of any campaigning that's going on locally. So yeah, there's a few different things that you can do at the moment, and I'm really hopeful that over the next year or so we're going to be building more opportunities to get involved in our campaigns.
Thank you, Sofia, for your time. My next colleague is Monse. I have some question for you.
Hello, Sophie. Thank you. I have 2 questions for you today. My first question is, do you provide any training?
Yeah, so on training, so in addition to the kind of things that I talked about already, I mean, Shelter does provide training to other professionals to make sure that, you know, different local authorities or organisations that offer advice are able to sort of benefit and learn from the expertise that we have, and we learn from others all the time as well. So there is that sort of professional element of training. But in terms of like people and ordinary people getting involved and being coming along to training events, that's sort of what I mentioned before about a new training program that we're writing at the moment. It's very much in progress, but the idea is that it will involve different training skills around campaigning and organising, and it's something to keep an eye out for. I can't say just when it will be ready, but it's something that I'm really keen to do. So you can keep an eye on that by signing up for our campaign emails, and you'll hear about that hopefully this year.
Thank you. My second question, how can people be in touch with you?
So when it comes to advice, if anyone does need housing advice and support, the thing that I would probably say is that our website is the first place that you should go to. We have lots and lots and lots of information on there where we make kind of different sections covering different topics, from, you know, the things I mentioned before around deposits, around what to do about bad conditions, what to do about landlord harassment, how to sort of rent and what kinds of documents you should be provided with when you start renting. There's lots of advice available already. So going onto our website is the best place for that, and we can share a link later on. The other thing would be that if you have sort of an emergency housing situation, that's the time when you could probably use our helplines. They are for emergencies, and that's why we direct people to our website first. And then in terms of campaigning and how to sort of get more involved, I've talked about that quite a lot, but what we can do is share a link as well, so that, you know, anyone that sees this can sign up to our campaigns and get involved.
Okay, thank you, Sophie, for your time and for sharing this information with us. Important information. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been really lovely chatting with you all.
Conclusion. Housing problems. It is a big issue affecting our communities, and today we have heard from our organization that supports people who struggle with housing problems. Shelter is a national charity who provides assistance to individuals or families directly and via organizations. They take action and run campaigns and build relationships involving people and community groups. In this interview, we have heard about successful campaigns Shelter have run, including banning letting fees, some agents or landlords were asking future tenants to pay reference check fees, condition check fees, and so on, raising awareness about discrimination of people receiving benefits by agents and landlords who refuse to rent to them, banning revenge evictions, and introducing a temporary ban on all evictions during the pandemic. With shelter, there is no difference or discrimination in helping people to resolve housing problems, so everyone is welcome to be assisted. If you are struggling with a housing problems, contact shelter, and for sure you will get help.